The profession of spy is as old as recorded history, and it is the spy that we most often think of when we consider the topic of intelligence. That is, the collection and evaluation of information about our enemies, about our opponents, our competitors, and our friends. But information from spies is only one aspect of a complex process in the creation of intelligence that can aid us in our quest to think strategically. This lecture explores the sources and uses of reliable intelligence and how it contributes to the crafting of prudent strategy. To get us started, the popular motion picture Star Wars, released in 1977, has a short scene that pierces to the very heart of the lesson in today's lecture. At the end of the film, Luke Skywalker leads the Rebel Alliance in an attack on the Empire's Death Star. The Death Star is a powerful weapon that is about to destroy the rebel planet. Wave upon wave of fighters attack the Death Star in seeming futility. Then the scene switches to a scene inside the Death Star. At that point, a military intelligence officer approaches the Death Star commander, Grand Moff Tarkin, who's played by Peter Cushing. And it is here that we are presented with the conundrum of intelligence and decision-making. This is a powerfully subtle scene in the film. It is rich in meaning and highly instructive. And in my opinion, it invests Star Wars with depth and legitimacy and realism and elevates it to a level far above mere space opera. Perhaps you missed it. Here's the scene. Even as the rebels press their attack outside, the military intelligence officer approaches Grand Moff Tarkin with an intelligence report. He speaks these words: "We've analyzed their attack, sir, and there is a danger. Shall I have your ship standing by?" The response of the commander is critical. "Evacuate? In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances." This is the conundrum. When things appear to be going well, even at a crucial moment, commanders reject intelligence. Even when commanders are presented with reliable information, they reject it if it conflicts with their own internally derived biases. And yet, we continue to strive for knowledge. We strive for predictability. We strive to reduce uncertainty. And good strategy depends on the reduction of uncertainty. This lecture is about intelligence. In this lecture, we examine the role of intelligence collection and its crucial importance to the crafting of good strategy. First, we consider intelligence, what it is and what it isn't. And then we learn the role of competitor intelligence in helping us to craft strategy. Second, we reveal here the intelligence cycle to show how intelligence is produced, how you can produce intelligence as distinct from mere information. Third, we learn the major obstacles that thwart our use of intelligence in practice. Our objective here is to learn the fundamental principles of intelligence as it's practiced by intelligence agencies and utilized by world leaders. We learn how to harness the power of intelligence principles for our business firms and for our personal decision-making in areas where we find ourselves in competition. Why should we do this? For competitive advantage, either sustained or to seize fleeting advantages offered by brief pivot points afforded to us as windows of opportunity. Leonard Fuld is a leader in the field of competitive intelligence and business intelligence, and one of the country's top theorists and practitioners of intelligence. He tells us this simple directive: by actively seeking intelligence and learning how to use it, you can turn information into a powerful weapon to give you a competitive advantage. So what is intelligence? Well, there's a story, and it may be apocryphal, that an old French rule book on the card game of bridge suggests as its rule number 1, always try to see your opponent's cards. Well, always try to see your opponent's cards is, at bottom, the role of intelligence. In games of competition, whether in politics, or in sports, or in business, or in battle, we always want to see our opponent's cards. Intelligence is, at bottom, about seeing the other guy's cards. Intelligence. We use it, we hear it used, it's ubiquitous. But what is it? Let's consider first what it is not. It is not spying. It is not a database. It is not a crystal ball. Intelligence is not the compilation of nice-to-know facts to store in a library. It is not just information. We have far too much information. We are drowning in information. It is none of those things. The most succinct definition of intelligence I've seen is these two words: analyzed information. When we think of intelligence in its military or espionage context, we tend to think of spying or of aerial reconnaissance, of clandestine surveillance, electronic warfare, and signals interception. We think of the CIA and the National Security Agency and the Soviet Union's old KGB, Комитет государственной безопасности. We think of deception. We think of disinformation and operations security. We think of stroke and counterstroke, of an elaborate chess game played out on a chessboard comprising the nations of the earth. And this is all correct. But intelligence also is more subtle than this and has applications both great and small, outside the realm of world leaders, and closer to home for you and for me. So-called human intelligence information from spies, or HUMINT, as it's called by the intelligence establishment, is never more than one aspect of intelligence, which in turn is only one aspect of strategy. That said, the principles of intelligence collection, of analysis, and of dissemination and action are useful not only in the military, but in sports, in politics, and business as well. And those principles are applicable to our daily lives once we understand them. Wait, daily lives? Sports? Yes. Think of American professional football. Now, teams in the National Football League, the NFL, invest millions of dollars in technology, in staff, travel, and refined expertise in what they call scouting. They engage in all sorts of activity off the field so that they can gain a competitive advantage on the field. Teams evaluate opposing players. They evaluate the opposing coach's play calling in a myriad of game situations. They ask scenario questions such as, what is the most frequent play called in a third down and long situation at various locations on the field? They do this so that they may develop tendency charts on the other team's intentions in certain situations. Then, when these situations occur on the field during a game, a team is better able to react to the enemy's probable course of action. Now, this type of scouting is perfectly legal as long as it taps into open sources and does not violate league rules. Occasionally, teams can go too far. For instance, intercepting another team's cryptic signals and deciphering them in the violation of the NFL's regulations. Such interception of signals and code breaking has been around for centuries. The British, well, they deciphered the French Navy's semaphore code in 1808, which allowed them to read the signals passed between French ships and the shore and act accordingly to outmaneuver Napoleon's navy. And so we fast forward to a modern instance of signals interception in the city of New York in 2007. It was the opening game of the NFL season, and the New England Patriots were caught filming the New York Jets' defensive signals in violation of NFL rules. As punishment, the Patriots were ordered to hand over all tapes of illegal filming to the league office. They were fined a total of $750,000, and they were made to forfeit a first-round draft pick. The Patriots coach, Bill Belichick, was personally liable for $500,000 of the total fine. But sophisticated surveillance of an opponent's resources, capabilities, and intentions continues to play a crucial role, if not a deciding role, in the outcome of professional football contests. Millions of dollars are at stake on a successful season, and most NFL teams believe the investment worth it. In politics, too, intelligence plays an increasingly influential role. Both major U.S. political parties maintain departments of what is called opposition research. Political researchers unearth information on tax liens, divorce records, lawsuits, in their attempts to discredit candidates. They also comb through voting records of the targeted incumbents. Operatives from both parties conduct expensive and labor-intensive research to ascertain the weak points of opponents and develop attack points. How the intelligence is used varies by situation and is usually utilized for maximum impact, especially timing. For example, just prior to the 2000 presidential election, a news report surfaced revealing that Republican candidate George W. Bush had received a ticket for driving under the influence of alcohol back in 1976. Republican strategist Karl Rove credits the Al Gore campaign for the timely report just 5 days before the presidential election. So we can see that the development of intelligence and its exploitation in competition has wide applicability. Let's look now at the types of intelligence analysis available to us. Jan Herring is one of the creators of modern competitor intelligence. He is a former CIA analyst, and he launched the first major competitive intelligence function in a U.S. corporation back in 1986. Herring is considered one of the founders of the field of competitive intelligence and its application to business. According to Herring, there are 5 types of intelligence analysis. Preventing surprises to the organization by providing early warning, supporting the decision-making process, competitor assessment and monitoring, intelligence assessments for planning and strategy development, and finally analysis as a key part of the collection and reporting process. Intelligence is the final product of a conscious, intentional, targeted process designed to enlighten us about the resources, the capabilities, and the intentions of our friends and enemies, and ourselves. Those 3 elements are extremely important: resources, capabilities, intentions. Especially in competitive situations, we always have actual and potential competitors. And if we have any intention of prevailing against those competitors, it makes sense to know something about them. We must know what resources are available to them. We must know what capabilities they have. Can they utilize those resources? And we must know what they intend to do with those capabilities, either for good or for ill. For an example of how this applies, say, in sports, we need look no further than our game again of football. The resources available to an opponent consist of money, of draft picks of future players, and of contacts throughout the industry. The capabilities of an opponent consist of the developed resources. Capabilities could be manifested in, say, a powerful running game, mediocre passing game, and an outstanding linebacker core on defense. In other words, the opponent's capabilities show up as strengths and weaknesses in various aspects of the game. The intentions of an opponent consist of his immediate and his future decision-making. How will our opponent use his capabilities against us? As you can see, all of this is designed to reveal to us the future. We're striving to reduce uncertainty, striving to make life more predictable. Now, the obvious question is, how do we obtain intelligence, useful intelligence, actionable intelligence? Well, these natural questions bring us to the intelligence cycle. The intelligence cycle. Usable, actionable intelligence doesn't just happen. It doesn't just serve itself up to us on demand. It's a product of conscious effort, of planning, logic, lots of insight, and a little bit of luck. And superb intelligence is like a precious gold nugget. At the heart of our intelligence efforts is the intelligence cycle. This is the engine that drives our vision of the future. It's a 5-step process that ideally yields actionable intelligence that our CEO or our commander can use, intelligence that we can use. The intelligence cycle consists of planning and setting priority intelligence requirements. It consists of collection, of analysis, of dissemination, and finally, action. And in the cycle, it goes around again. It's what we like to call a virtuous cycle. As we collect information, as we analyze and produce our intelligence product, it helps us refine our target. It helps us focus our efforts on the next spin of the intelligence cycle. The velocity of the cycle, how fast the cycle spins, depends on the criticality of the issues and the time demands of the situation. Let's look briefly at each step in the cycle so that we can create our own virtuous cycle of intelligence. The first stage in the cycle is Priority Intelligence Requirements, or PIR. This phase of the intelligence cycle determines what information you collect and what information you ignore. It gives direction to your efforts so that you don't flail around in a sea of information. It targets and it focuses your efforts. Too many people collect information aimlessly. Young students have this problem, and so do many older folks, even businessmen who should know better. Instead of designing a plan of attack, determining what our goals are, we plunge into the morass of research. Research keeps us from having to choose. We can put off the necessity of making tough choices. Now, research, of course, can be fun. Ask any novelist. But at some point, we have to select what is important. And this is much easier to do prior to information collection than after. We must determine our priority intelligence requirements beforehand to guide our collection efforts. Leads us to the second stage in the cycle, which is collection. This means that you begin to acquire information at different levels and from different sources. It's much more than doing a Google search. Collection is a systematic and a three-dimensional process. It involves collecting information from multiple sources, from databases to trade shows, to press releases, to interviews of relevant people, to overhearing conversations. And here is where good judgment and determination come into play. We're naturally drawn to techniques and to sources with which we feel comfortable. Bodybuilders are like that. They gravitate to certain exercises that they do well, and they neglect exercises that are necessary but painful. Likewise, we gravitate to the techniques that we do well. Database searches, perhaps trade show attendance, perhaps searching press releases, interviewing our competitors' former employees. Now, in this phase, we must discipline ourselves to pursue comprehensive intelligence collection or information collection. We must ensure that our efforts have depth so as to give us a full, three-dimensional picture that is not biased from the very start. This brings us to the third stage, which is analysis. And this is where the analyst earns his or her money. Some people believe that analysis is a kind of art rather than a mere craft. Certainly it's not routine work, and a successful analyst has certain characteristics: patience, persistence, insight, broad intellectual context. And the tools of analysis we can use at this stage are many, and the entire books are devoted to their use. Some of the techniques we've already seen are SWOT analysis, value chain analysis, pest analysis, 5 forces industry analysis, but there are others, including competitor analysis, political risk analysis, and scenario analysis. The important thing to remember is that each of these tools has strengths and weaknesses. We should never rely upon a single technique to inform our strategic decision-making. The fourth stage is dissemination, and it is here, at this most critical of moments, that many intelligence efforts fail. Some intelligence analysts make this mistake of simply presenting collected facts as intelligence, with minimal analysis, with minimal conclusions, with minimal links to the here and now, with minimal relevance to what we must do strategically. Beware of the nice-to-know syndrome. Intelligence is a perishable product, unlike our gold nugget. Intelligence is meant to be used. It requires action on our part. It informs our decision-making. The typical lack of analysis is what leads to the expression actionable intelligence. But that's redundant. Real intelligence is always focused on present and future actions. And this brings us to the fifth stage of action. When we present our findings, or when we consider our findings for our own personal use, we must have courage. We must have the courage to utter the words, "For our firm, this means that we should do," or "For me, this means that I should take this action." The result of all this should be targeted, crisp reports that make clear what's going on. So why do so many firms seem to get it wrong? Why don't more firms incorporate intelligence? Why don't more firms act on intelligence? Well, there are many reasons for this seemingly irrational response to intelligence. The irrationality of desiring to know the future and yet refusing to accept the information when it's proffered, if it contradicts what the higher-ups believe already. And even despite our best efforts, we're often faced with a phenomenon that can be called the Cassandra curse. This name comes from Greek mythology. Greek mythology is so enduring for us because it speaks so much to the human condition, to the verities and to the foibles that touch human beings in every epoch. Let's turn to the tale of Cassandra, because this minor Greek story captures the conundrum of intelligence perfectly. Cassandra was the beautiful daughter of King Priam of Troy. Apollo was taken with Cassandra. Apollo is perhaps best known as the god of the light and knowledge. He was taken with Cassandra's beauty, made romantic overtures to her, and he gave her a great gift, the gift of prophecy. But even so, she spurned him, and Apollo responded with a curse. He allowed Cassandra to keep her gift of prophecy, her ability to see into the future. But she was cursed so that no one would believe her, nor could she change or even affect the course of events. She could not avoid disaster if she foresaw it. The Cassandra curse. Intelligence professionals feel that they're sometimes cursed, like Cassandra. Consider this paradox for a moment. There is sometimes no one better equipped to see into the future, however imperfectly, than the professional intelligence analysts. But is the analyst believed? Does the commander believe the intelligence officer over his own instincts? Think of Star Wars again as the intelligence officer informs Grand Moff Tarkin of the danger in the rebel attack. Even we have trouble believing ourselves at times of knowing what to do with the intelligence we uncover, to understand its implications. Exclusive knowledge can sometimes paralyze us. It can paralyze the leader. Courage is required. There's a big obstacle to overcome here, and it's a paradox of leadership. Now, this paradox exists in both business and in the military. It exists wherever big and irrevocable decisions must be made. The paradox of leadership is this: the very qualities that make for a strong leader at the most senior levels are the same qualities that cause those leaders to reject the informed advice of others, even if those others are intelligence professionals. This is true in business, and it's true in the military as well. Sometimes much of the character of intelligence discussion takes on the quality of the old saying, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. And so on. There's a large kernel of truth in this view that small pivot points in history add up to major differences in how things eventually turn out. And intelligence is often the key to these pivot points, the availability of intelligence and the courage and the boldness to act upon it. The Civil War was surely a major historical turning point for the United States. If the South had won the Civil War, world history would certainly have developed in ways so radically different that we cannot even fathom the repercussions. Given objective factor endowments that figure into the construction of a nation's engine of war, the South never should have come close to winning the Civil War. And yet, the South came so very close to winning. Let's talk about one of those pivot points here, one that relates directly to the role of intelligence in planning strategy. The year is 1862. It is September, and General Robert E. Lee is on the march into Maryland with his Army of Northern Virginia. His intent is to relieve the pressure on Virginia and to carry the war to the north, perhaps even bestir Confederate sympathizers in Maryland. The Northern commander of the Army of the Potomac, Major General George McClellan, is unaware of the capabilities and intentions of his opponent. But the winds of fortune soon change this. As Lee marches north on September 13th, history faced a pivot point that turned on intelligence and how it was handled. Union Private Barton Mitchell found a copy of General Lee's Special Order No. 191 in an envelope wrapped around several cigars. He found it in a field in Frederick County, Maryland, a field just vacated by a Confederate rear guard force. The orders gave details of the Army of Northern Virginia movements during the early days of this invasion, including the splitting of Lee's army. The found orders were sent up the chain of command where they reached the commander, Union Major General McClellan. Here's an instance where a commander was blessed with the gift of critical intelligence, a clear statement of the intentions of his opponent. For a brief moment in 1862, the fog of war was lifted for General McClellan. He could see into the future. He had intelligence that could enable him to destroy Lee's army in detail and end the Civil War in September of 1862. When McClellan read the order, he stated, "Here's a paper with which if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home." But one historian responds, he couldn't whip Bobby Lee, and he didn't. At the critical pivot point in history, McClellan hesitated. Many military historians believe that McClellan failed to fully exploit the strategic advantage of the intelligence for two classic reasons. First, was the intelligence authentic, or was it the bait for a trap? This possibility gave McClellan pause. And second, the intelligence told McClellan Lee's intentions, but what were Lee's capabilities? How big was Lee's army? McClellan did not know. McClellan, in fact, always seemed to think he was outnumbered, and this tendency fueled his hesitation. And we now know that throughout his time as commander of the Army of the Potomac, General McClellan habitually overestimated the size and strength of Lee's army. Time was critical for McClellan to be able to use the information given to him, and he moved too slowly. The result was the indecisive Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest day in U.S. military history, when more than 7,000 soldiers lost their lives. General Lee retreated to Virginia, and the Civil War lasted another 2.5 years. We speak of windows of opportunity that open and close. Here's one such example. The incredible temporary advantage afforded by critical intelligence was squandered in one of history's great pivot points. So we can see that even when critical, high-quality intelligence is available, it requires boldness to act decisively, correctly, and quickly. Let's sum up. Intelligence is analyzed information, and the intelligence cycle that makes intelligence possible consists of priority setting, of collection and analysis, and of dissemination. It's a virtuous cycle, as the information we analyze and disseminate also helps us refine our priorities and focus our efforts on the next spin of the intelligence cycle. But for the fruits of the cycle to count as intelligence, there must be a constant focus on the actions being considered. Intelligence is always about possible action. The Cassandra curse refers to what can happen when first-rate intelligence is ignored or not put to use. And this is the conundrum. Remember those words from Star Wars? We've analyzed their attacks, sir, and there is a danger. We must understand what intelligence is and what it is not. We must know how to set priorities, collect information, and analyze it to create intelligence of genuine value. But we must know more. We must also, above all, have the courage to act on that intelligence decisively and prudently so as not to squander its value. First-rate intelligence coupled to a strategic plan gives us an amazing ability to see and affect the future. An ability that ancient Greeks familiar with the Cassandra story might have regarded as almost godlike. Intelligence sheds new light that we ignored our peril, and it is the lifeblood of strategic thinking.